Welcome to a true 1860 Victorian time capsule, where 3 generations of the same family lived for nearly a century. Tucked among the elegant brownstones of Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, the Gibson House Museum still holds around 90% of the family's original belongings. The furniture, artwork, wallpaper, china, books, clothing, and personal items throughout the house remain almost exactly where the family left them, making the home feel truly lived in, as if they just stepped away. A true Victorian time capsule that is so untouched that it even helped bring the movie Little Women to life on screen, as if we've been invited into the Gibson family's home 150 years ago, surrounded by the very objects that shaped their everyday lives. Today we're exploring this historic house room by room, uncovering the stories of the family and the staff who lived and worked here, including one fascinating family member who was often misunderstood during his lifetime, yet whose determination saved this home so future generations could experience an authentic glimpse into Victorian life for themselves. Hi, I'm Allie, and welcome back to Fab Little Dish, where we celebrate vintage homes, historic interiors, and the stories that keep these places alive. If you love historic house tours, hit that thumbs up. It really helps support the channel and continues these adventures coming your way each and every week. Now let's head to Boston together to learn more about this little slice of history. The story of this home begins with Catherine Hammond Gibson, the matriarch of the household. Catherine married sugar trader John Gardner Gibson in 1833, and the couple spent the first 2 years of their marriage in Cuba before returning to Boston. They soon welcomed their 2 sons, John Jr. and Charles, but just a few years later, John died, leaving Catherine a widow with 2 very young boys to take care of. She never remarried. Instead, Catherine raised her sons and remained financially independent. Then, in 1859, she moved into Boston's newly created and increasingly fashionable Back Bay neighborhood, purchasing the property at 137 Beacon Street and building the townhouse we know today as the Gibson House. The Gibsons belonged to Boston's social elite. Their world was shaped not only by wealth, but by family ancestry, education, religion, and the social connections that defined old Boston society. Catherine lived here with her boys, and in 1871, the household expanded when her son Charles married Rosamond Warren, the daughter of a prominent Boston surgeon. And after their honeymoon, the newlyweds returned to 137 Beacon Street and moved in with Catherine. The couple went on to have 3 children, Mary Ethel, Charles Jr., known as Charlie, and their youngest daughter Rosamond, named after her mother, who the family called Little Rosamond. Catherine remained here until her death in 1888, at the age of 84. Rosamond had not only raised her own children in the house, but had also shared the home and helped care for her mother-in-law for almost 17 years. Charles and Rosamond remained married for 45 years. When Charles died following a long illness in 1916, Rosamond wrote, "It seemed hard after 45 years of love and devotion to face life alone. But she did. She continued living at 137 Beacon Street for another 18 years. As the children grew older, each followed a very different path. Mary Ethel was unusually independent for a woman of her generation, surely taking after her mother and grandmother. She traveled regularly and even crossed the country alone in her 20s to visit relatives in California. She later married Dr. Freeman Allen, an early specialist in anesthesia and the grandson of Harriet Beecher Stowe. Little Rosamond married a distant cousin inside the house in 1916, and then established a home of her own just a few blocks away. But the person who would ultimately save the Gibson family home was Charlie, the middle child, the unconventional son, and the one family member who understood that this house was a legacy worth preserving. Charlie never followed his father into business. He briefly studied architecture at MIT, traveled through Europe, wrote poetry and travel books, cultivated gardens, and became known as one of Boston's more colorful and unconventional characters at the time. During his travels, Charlie formed a romantic relationship with Maurice Talvenade, a self-styled French count. He later transformed parts of their story into a lightly fictionalized travelogue, published under a pseudonym. As a gay man living at a time when he could not openly acknowledge this part of his life, Charlie was often misunderstood. He never married or had children, and the traditional life expected of a man from his family and social standing was simply never the life meant for him. In 1934, at the age of 60, he returned to 137 Beacon Street to care for his aging mother. Rosamond died later that year, leaving Charlie alone in the house where he had grown up his entire life. He also found himself in a complicated position. His father had never fully accepted the way Charlie lived his life and left him with nothing in his will, passing the estate instead to his sisters. His sisters later sold their shares back to Charlie for $1 apiece, allowing Charlie to reclaim the family home that had always felt like his rightful inheritance. Then in 1936, Charlie visited his cousin Henry Francis DuPont, who was beginning to transform his Delaware estate into what would later become the Winterthur Museum. Definitely an inspiration for what he wanted to do with his own family home. That visit seemed to have strengthened Charlie's belief that his own family home and the Victorian Boston it represented was also worth saving. He began deliberately preserving each room, organizing the family's collections, and welcoming visitors into the house himself. He was the first one to give tours here. At a time when Victorian interiors were considered old-fashioned, going out of style, and where many Back Bay townhouses were being remodeled, divided, or demolished, Charlie recognized that the world of his childhood was quickly disappearing. Preserving this house became his legacy because he kept the rooms, furnishings, artwork, all of the items inside as they were when his family lived there. The Gibson family house represents a 19th century way of life, and it's the actual home of one family that's been preserved across 3 generations. That's what makes this place so special. Charlie died here in 1954 at the age of 80. 3 years later, the Gibson House Museum officially opened to the public and has been offering tours ever since. And nearly 70 years after that, we're still able to walk through the home that he fought so hard to preserve. The Gibson family's comfortable lifestyle depended on the work of many people behind the scenes. Over the house's nearly 100 years as a private residence, dozens of employees lived and worked here. They cooked the meals, cleaned the rooms, cared for the children, tended the fires, managed the laundry, and kept the household running. Among them were Nora Redican, a chambermaid, Mary McDonald, known as Nan, who cared for the 3 Gibson children, and Patrick Dooley, the family's longtime chauffeur. Some employees stayed only briefly, while others remained with the family for years. Although they left behind fewer written records than the Gibsons, evidence of their labor can be found throughout the house, particularly in the service spaces that we're going to be exploring later together. What makes the Gibson house especially fascinating is how closely its story is tied to the creation of Boston's Back Bay. Today, Boston's Back Bay neighborhood is known for its elegant rows of 19th century townhouses. But when Catherine Gibson purchased this property, much of the neighborhood was still being transformed from water into land, and the name Back Bay is quite literal. This area was once a shallow tidal bay connected to the Charles River. In the 1820s, a dam was built in an attempt to harness the tides and generate power for nearby mills. But the plan never worked as intended. Instead, the restricted water became stagnant, polluted, and increasingly unhealthy. By the middle of the 19th century, Boston was expanding rapidly. Its population had grown dramatically through commerce, industry, and immigration, and the crowded city needed more room. So Boston began one of the largest landmaking projects of the 19th century. Starting near the public garden, the tidal flats were gradually filled as development moved westward. Trains carried enormous quantities of gravel into the city, creating hundreds of acres of entirely new land. And the Back Bay was not allowed to grow randomly or sporadically. It was carefully planned as a fashionable residential neighborhood with broad avenues, uniform rows of townhouses, and a layout influenced by the grand boulevards of Paris. And that same layout exists today. It was this brand new and increasingly prestigious neighborhood that Catherine Hammond Gibson wanted to build her home in. On October 1st, 1859, Catherine and her nephew Samuel Hammond Russell purchased adjoining lots at 137 and 135 Beacon Street. Catherine paid $3,696 for her property, more than $100,000 in today's value, and hired Boston architect Edward Clark Cabot to design both homes. Although these were among his earliest residences in the newly developing Back Bay, the Gibson house was designed in the French academic style, blending the balance of symmetry of neoclassicism with the more romantic influences of the 19th century. From the street, that can be seen in its orderly facade and restrained ornamentation. Construction began almost immediately. By May of 1860, a Boston newspaper reported that both houses were nearly roofed in, and Catherine soon moved into number 137 with her son Charles. Although the exterior was designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding neighborhood, the layout inside was far more unusual. In most Back Bay row houses, the entrance and staircase were placed along one side. Here, the front door opens into a large central reception hall, where a broad, sweeping staircase creates a dramatic first impression and leads visitors toward the formal dining room. In the late 19th century, a guest would have been greeted at the door by a female servant who collected their calling card and delivered it to the family member they hoped to see. And while they waited, this room gave them plenty to take in and look at. The dark walnut furniture, richly carved woodwork, and sweeping staircase reflect the Renaissance Revival style, popular during the mid-19th century. Heavy, ornate, and substantial, these details immediately signified refinement, permanence, and a family's wealth. The most striking feature in here to me, though, is this wall covering. This embossed gold paper known as Japanese leather wallpaper is just fabulous. The paper was pressed to imitate the appearance of a much more expensive material of leather, and it is absolutely striking. The Gibsons added it around in 1890 when Japanese-inspired design had become highly fashionable in Western interiors. Its metallic surface and deep texture would have reflected the light from the gas fixtures, creating an especially dramatic first impression when you first walked in. The carved archway ahead frames the entrance into the formal dining room, while the large mirror helps reflect daylight and lamplight through what could otherwise have been a very dark interior. Even the tall case clock right here served more than a practical purpose. Positioned prominently in the hall, it became another visible sign of the family's taste and prosperity. This was where visitors formed their first impressions of the Gibsons, and nearly every surface was designed to assure them that they had entered the home of one of Boston's elite families. Just beyond the entrance hall is the formal dining room, where the table has been set for tea. Additional leaves could be inserted whenever the Gibsons entertained a larger group. Overlooking the room is a portrait of John Gardner Gibson, the sugar trader who married Catherine Hammond in 1833. Although he died more than 20 years before this house was built, the wealth generated through his business helped make Catherine's move to Boston's fashionable new Back Bay possible. But for families like the Gibsons, wealth was only part of the image they wanted to project. Displayed right here in the room is a Gibson coat of arms, used to suggest that the family belonged to a long and distinguished lineage. According to our guide, however, this was not historically authentic. This was used only to show off for Boston society at the time. This coat of arms reveals just how carefully the Gibsons shaped the image they presented to their guests. In 19th century Boston, wealth alone was not always enough to secure a place among the city's established elite. Family lineage, religion, education, and ties to early colonial society all carried enormous weight. By displaying a coat of arms, even one that was not historically authentic, the Gibsons were presenting themselves as members of an old and distinguished Boston family, rather than people of newly acquired wealth. So very much new money versus old money. The original china and imported decorative pieces throughout the room also helped reinforce this image. The family collected objects from China and Japan and created for export to Western buyers. Pieces like this reflected refined taste, international trade, and the family's ability to afford goods from around the world. But maintaining this polished appearance required a great deal of work behind the scenes. Just beside the dining room here is the butler's pantry, where the original dumbwaiter connected directly to the kitchen below. Food could be prepared downstairs and sent up to this floor, allowing the household staff to serve meals efficiently, discreetly, and ensure that they were served warm as well. Overhead, the chandelier offers another glimpse into how the house evolved over time. It began as a gaselier and then was converted to electricity around 1910. Instead of replacing it, the family adapted the original fixture, preserving its Victorian appearance while bringing the home into the modern age. And here we are on the second level, and this floor was the principal entertaining area in the house, with two large rooms, the music room and the library. This is the family library, one of the most personal and lived-in rooms in the entire house. It served partly as an office for Charles Gibson Sr., but it was also where the family gathered to read, spend quieter evenings together, and entertain informally with one another. During formal dinners, the men might have withdrawn to this room afterwards for drinks, cigars, and conversation, while the women gathered in the music room across the hall, but we'll hit there later. Rosamond read to her children here, and we see some of those exact same books right here displayed on the sofa. Three generations of Gibsons are represented here in this room on the walls, including a delicate penciled portrait of Catherine, the matriarch who built the home, and a portrait of Charlie Gibson Jr. displayed above the fireplace. The library was also a place where the family could experience stories through images, using a stereopticon, an early form of a slide projector. Through this device, they displayed scenes of distant cities, natural wonders, images from their travels, and historic places across the world, right on the wall. It was a marvel at the time. And this room eventually became part of another story altogether. In Greta Gerwig's 2019 adaptation of Little Women, the library appeared as the office of Jo March's publisher. With its dark wood, crowded bookshelves, family portraits, and authentic Victorian furnishings, very little had to be changed to transport the room back to the 19th century. Across the hall is the music room, the largest room in the house and the Gibson family's principal space for entertaining. More than any other room, this space was intended to showcase the family's wealth, taste, and cultural sophistication, and it immediately feels different from the darker rooms that we have seen so far, and that contrast was intentional. After Catherine Gibson died in 1888, her daughter-in-law, Rosamond Warren Gibson, began updating portions of the house to reflect the changing tastes of the late 19th century. In the 1890s, she gave this room a major transformation, replacing its heavier Victorian appearance with something brighter and more refined. The dark woodwork and several pieces of furniture were painted white. A pale, striped wallpaper with delicate floral details was installed, along with white Lincrusta wainscoting. The wall-to-wall carpeting was removed and replaced with hardwood flooring. The Chinese rugs spread across the floor here were added later by Charlie Gibson Jr., who purchased them while traveling in Shanghai during the 1910s. The overall effect is much lighter and more French-inspired than the rest of the house, reflecting Rosamond's effort to align the room with changing tastes while still preserving the family's inherited furnishings and collections. The brass and crystal chandelier, as well as the matching wall sconces, also came from Rosamond's childhood home. The chandelier was converted to electricity, but the wall sconces never worked in this home. She used them instead to hang small framed pictures so that they still served a purpose. One of the most delicate objects in this room is the lithophane lamp. Its 6 porcelain panels appear almost blank when the lamp is unlit, but once illuminated from within, the images emerge through variations in the thickness of the porcelain, creating scenes that look almost like glowing photographs. This is absolutely spectacular. It's an original Gibson family piece and one of those objects that truly has to be seen illuminated to appreciate how intricately beautiful it is. These pieces are rare, fragile, and such a treat to see in person. Above the cabinet hangs a painting known as Cleopatra Dissolving the Pearl, a 19th century copy after the Italian artist Guido Reni. During the Great Boston Fire of 1872, Rosamond rushed to help rescue valuables from her family's Park Street home, which looked like it was going to be right in the path of the flames. The paintings were placed on top of a cart carrying a large chest of silver and other family treasures, but on the journey back to Beacon Street, the cart overturned. When Rosamond reached the scene, she found the painting lying on the road with a heavy chest laying on top of it. One corner had pierced Cleopatra's painted hand. The work was later restored and brought here, even though, as Rosamond later discovered, the fire never actually reached her childhood home. It clearly remained important to her, not only as a valuable painting, but as a family heirloom that she had slipped out in the middle of the night to rescue. The room is filled with other inherited artwork, clocks, porcelain, and decorative objects accumulated across generations. Not absolutely everything here belonged to the Gibsons, though. This little small cat bed, for example, was added later. It is period appropriate, but our tour guide said that he just loves this piece, and I must agree with him. But everything else in this room really remains tied to the family, which is incredible. And that's what just makes everything in here feel so incredibly authentic. The rooms changed as tastes evolved, objects were inherited, technology advanced, and each generation left its own layer behind, really giving us a true glimpse into each stage of time when the family was living here. This is the back staircase. Rather than a dedicated servant's staircase, this was used by the household staff and also used by the family members and close friends. Unlike the grand front staircase, it was simply just a more private and practical route through the house. And when we're standing right here on the second floor landing, we can actually see how this staircase was purely used for show rather than function. It does not continue through the upper floors, it just ends here. Beyond this point, the family, close friends, and household staff use that practical back staircase to move through the home. This helps explain why so many grand staircases in neighboring Back Bay row houses were later removed. As styles changed and as space became much more rare and more desired, these staircases were just not useful and taken out. But here, the original one survives exactly as it was designed, and it's really interesting to see. Above us is another unusual surviving feature in the home, an original ventilation shaft, which rises through the center of the house all the way to the roof. Interior windows on several floors could be opened into the shaft, allowing warmer air to rise, helping draw fresh air through the narrow townhouse. Its frosted glass openings also brought a small amount of light into interior spaces that had no exterior windows, so it definitely had multiple purposes. And now we're on the third floor, and this is Rosamond Warren Gibson's bedroom, the largest bedroom in the house and part of the family's original private suite. When Rosamond married Charles Gibson in 1871, she moved into the home he already shared with his mother, Catherine. But while the newlyweds were away on their honeymoon in New York, Rosamond's own mother prepared this room especially for her. It was almost like a condition for the new couple to be living here and take care of Catherine in her older age. While her health was on the decline, her mother commissioned an elaborate 13-piece bedroom suite made locally from bird's eye maple, carved and painted to resemble bamboo. The furniture reflected the growing Victorian fascination with East Asian design, and this whole set was custom made for this room. It's gorgeous too. The matching bed, dressers, chairs, and vanity were created specifically for Rosamond and specifically for this room, making it the most complete and personal interior space within the entire house. The vanity is especially striking with its large central mirror surrounded by small drawers used for storing jewelry, grooming tools, and other personal belongings that are still here. The bed may appear small by modern standards, but it was intended just for one person. Rosamond and Charles maintained separate bedrooms connected by a shared bathroom. While the formal rooms downstairs showed guests how the Gibsons wanted to be seen, this room offers a more personal glimpse into Rosamond herself, both as a private individual and as a woman responsible for overseeing the daily life of the entire house. The adjoining bathroom here was also remarkably modern for a Boston home built in 1860. Back Bay houses were constructed with indoor plumbing, but this bathroom originally had only cold running water. Any hot water Rosamond wanted for bathing had to be heated downstairs and carried all the way up by members of the household staff. One of the most unusual features is this tall ventilation shaft that rises above the room that is right here directly in the center of the room. Because of where the bathroom sits in this narrow row house, the shaft helped bring light and fresh air into the interior of the building. Windows opening into it would allow the bathroom and surrounding hallway to be ventilated without facing directly outdoors. So just because of how these townhouses are set up, this would have been an incredibly smelly, stuffy space if it wasn't for this ventilation shaft. So another innovative feature for the time. And through the shared bathroom is Charlie Gibson's red study, a room that reveals more of his personality than perhaps any other space in the house. This had originally been the bedroom of his father, Charles Gibson Sr., who lived here until his death in 1916. But in 1934, Charlie returned to 137 Beacon Street to care for his aging mother, Rosamond. By then, he was 60 years old and had lived away from his childhood home for more than 2 decades. So when he decided to come back, he made sure there was a condition that he was able to make this room his own. So he transformed his father's former bedroom into a private study, a place where he could write, surround himself with books and personal objects, and entertain his close friends away from the more formal spaces downstairs. And given the lack of support that Charlie received from his father regarding his lifestyle, reclaiming this room and making it entirely his own must have carried a certain satisfaction. The deep red walls, heavy curtains, crowded portraits, books, and personal mementos really make this one of the most intimate rooms in the whole house. Unlike the carefully arranged public spaces, this feels unmistakably like Charlie's own private world. Charlie had briefly studied architecture at MIT, but rather than following his father into business, he devoted himself to writing, poetry, travel, and horticulture. He published a travel book about France, several volumes of poetry, and a novel, but it was self-published, so he wasn't actually an official author. While he never achieved the literary recognition he might have hoped for, writing remained an important part of his identity throughout his life. Charlie also regularly gave illustrated lectures about his travels to really share these places with the world. So this electric postcard projector would have helped him bring a lot of these journeys to life during these lectures, allowing him to share the places, architecture, art, and experiences that he had encountered abroad. This room later became connected to another one of Charlie's great interests, preserving the Boston that he grew up with and wanted always to remember. He began welcoming visitors into the house and giving tours that showed them what a Victorian Back Bay home had once looked like. At a time when rooms like these were being modernized, emptied, cleared out, or divided into apartments, Charlie treated the house and the world it once represented as something precious and worth saving. So this was so much more than just his study. This was a sanctuary for him, one where he could feel himself, be accepted, and share his life with the rest of the world, while creating his lasting legacy. At the very top of the house, the 5th floor was reserved for the female household staff. We didn't get a chance to go up here, but I just wanted to briefly talk about it because those stairs winding up made me curious as well while I was on the tour. In 1880, 6 women shared just 4 small bedrooms up there. Only 2 of those rooms had fireplaces, and the warmer rooms were likely assigned according to seniority and position within the household. The family's male servants slept separately on the ground floor since it would have been considered improper for unmarried men and women to sleep near one another. Down on the ground floor here is the kitchen, the busy center of life for the Gibson family's household staff. Their work began early and often continued late into the evening. Meals were prepared here, water was heated, coal was carried, and fires throughout the house were kept burning. The room would rarely have been still. This space had a constant hustle and bustle. At its center is the original cast iron stove installed in 1884. Its 5 cooking surfaces were used to prepare meals for both the family and the staff, while the heat from the stove also warmed water for bathing, cleaning, and laundry throughout the house. Because of that, the stove remained burning for much of the day, even during the summers. So this room was also probably very hot. They were never entirely removed from the needs of the family upstairs. This original mechanical call bell system up here connected this service area to rooms throughout the house. Whenever a family member pulled a bell cord, a corresponding bell rang below, telling the staff exactly where they were needed. And there's also this storage cabinet over here that has all kinds of different gadgets from the Victorian era, again, many of which were used by the Gibson staff themselves. This room reveals the reality behind the comfort and refinement that we saw upstairs. Every meal served, warm bath prepared, and the fire glowing in any of the fireplaces depended on the constant labor taking place right here. And beside the kitchen is the laundry room, where some of the most exhausting work in the house took place. Dresses, undergarments, bedding, towels, and table linens had to be soaked, scrubbed, boiled, rinsed, wrung out, dried, pressed, and often mended, all by hand. This mechanical wringer, also known as a mangle, helped remove excess water before the laundry was hung to dry. And these irons also had to be heated right here by coal, and they would not stay hot long. The heat would actually start to come off of them right away as soon as they were removed, so you had to iron quickly and keep reapplying these irons onto the coal so that they can get hot again. It seems very tedious and very draining. One of the women who likely used all of these things was Mary A. MacDonald Crocker, a Canadian immigrant who first joined the Gibson household as a nursemaid. After the children grew older, Mary remained with the family and became their laundress, taking responsibility for the enormous amount of clothing and household linen used throughout the home. I really like that the museum gives a big nod to her because this seemed like a space filled with so much work. The family's privileged world upstairs simply would not exist without the staff whose labor sustained it below, and I really like how the museum completely shows that through and through. And we're really able to get a sense of what Victorian life was like during this time because of Charlie Gibson. And because of him, this Victorian time capsule still feels like you're stepping into someone's home from 150 years ago, which is such a special feeling. Let me know which room, original detail, or personal story stood out to you the most. Also, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the house tours that I have planned for you. And trust me, I just went on a journey and I have so many to bring your way. So until the next one, my friends, keep enjoying the beauty of vintage home. Au revoir.